democratically run company can survive where capitalism thrives. You may be wondering, what is a democratically run company? It's a company whose leadership are elected by the members on a one vote per one member basis, instead of the traditional capitalist model where leadership is elected by a stockholder vote, and whoever has the most stock traditionally has the greatest influence as to who is elected for leadership. Now, for a company to survive, whether it's a capitalist company or a democratic company, it needs sales. And I believe there are three primary components to go into creating strong sales growth. One is quality product that's in demand. Two is a price that's affordable and considered reasonable by the consumers. And three is a loyal customer base. Now, I believe Henry Ford addressed these three issues quite effectively when he started manufacturing vehicles. He used a manufacturing assembly line to assemble his cars, which gave him a far better consistency in the assembly of the product, and also a reputation as being a vehicle that broke down far less than the other vehicles on the market, which is good quality to have. And second, he sold his product at a price that was affordable by a far greater portion of society. Previously, only the very wealthiest of individuals could afford a motorized vehicle. And then third, he paid his workers double the going rate at the time, enabling many of them to also be able to afford to buy his product. And I imagine they spoke highly of that to their friends and relatives, liking that arrangement, and compelling them to also become loyal customers. And with those three primary components in place, I believe the company was able to sustain long-term sales growth. Now, geothermal power is also a quality product, in that it has far less of an environmental impact than the alternatives out there. And it's reliable, because since it gets its heat or energy from heat stored in the ground, if properly developed, it never has to be refueled, and isn't dependent upon the weather. It can produce the same amount of power regardless of whether it's raining, sunny, or windy out. And for cost, since it doesn't require any fuel to be refueled, it can be produced for potentially less than the other alternatives. In other words, something that requires some sort of fossil fuel, be it gas or oil or coal, is going to cost more than something that doesn't require any kind of fuel. And then third, if some of that economic value is passed on to the workers in the form of a democratically run company, whose mission is to create quality jobs, and the rest of that economic benefit realized from low-cost energy is invested in infrastructure that creates more quality jobs, you can create a very strong, loyal customer base. And over time, you can increase your sales growth and sustain long-term sales growth with geothermal power. Now, if a democratically run company whose mission is to create quality jobs is developing a geothermal power plant in, say, an industrial park, they can pay their workers a fair wage and still make enough money to reinvest a large portion of the economic benefit realized from low-cost energy in manufacturing industries. And if a fair amount of that economic value is passed on to those industries as well, they, one, going to be loyal customers and help to build the sales of the electricity, but also they will be able to take the advantage and the benefits of that low-cost energy, and if they're producing a quality product, they too can increase their long-term sales growth potential. And if they're passing that on to the workers in the form of quality wages, you have both the primary facility, the power plant, and the secondary industries creating vast numbers of quality jobs. For every manufacturing and industry power plant job created, 3 to 5 additional jobs can be created from that increased economic activity. And all that goes to increase the stability of those companies in that area and makes it possible for them to achieve what the auto industry achieved, which was long-term job security for the workers with a quality product that was in demand. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to companies that hire workers for minimum wage. One of the advantages is they're able to pay out better profits to their investors, and they're able to potentially sell their products for less, making use of the economic value of low-cost wages. The disadvantages are those workers are making less and are paying out less in taxes and are buying fewer products, creating less economic activity. Now, the economic impact that geothermal power could have if it's developed by a democratically run company is, well, if they're creating vast numbers of quality jobs, the companies that are hiring minimum wage workers can only fill those positions if there's a very high unemployment rate. In other words, if people can find a quality job elsewhere, they're not going to probably want to work for minimum wage, which would compel those companies to pay a better wage in order to keep their positions filled. And as a result of paying better wages would in turn create a lot more economic activity, both for democratic companies and corporate companies, or capitalist companies, which are going to realize better profits from increased economic activity. There are benefits to record high corporate profits. One way is companies paying out high dividends and investors and venture capitalists reinvesting in new technologies, or being able to realize the value of hostile corporate takeovers of profitable companies. However, a large portion of the venture capital, as I understand it, is held by less than 1% of the population, which means most people don't benefit from the full value of new technologies or low-cost energy. Now, society does benefit from the value of the trickle-down, in that a certain amount of mansions and yachts are purchased and other luxury items. However, those luxury items represent a fairly small portion of our total economy. Whereas if a larger portion of society were benefiting from the full value of low-cost energy, far more people could participate in our economy in a more active way. Now, record high corporate profits can also be beneficial if they are realized by a democratically run company whose mission is to create quality jobs, and profits are invested in both the worker and benefits and infrastructure that creates more quality jobs. In that instance, a much greater portion of society will benefit from the economic value of low-cost energy. The beneficial aspects could be profound for society over the long run and the short run as well, both socially as far as less social unrest, and other ways as far as more economic activity we might see in new technologies that you might not otherwise see, and a lot of new businesses would more likely be able to survive, both small and large businesses, with increased economic activity. Now, as interesting as geothermal power is, the real challenge in developing this technology is not the technology itself, it's the funding of this technology. In other words, most venture capital out there now has a substantial investment in fossil fuels, and for them to invest in an alternative like geothermal power represents a conflict of interest. And also politicians, many of them are heavily supported by these industries, and so for them to support an alternative like geothermal is also a conflict of interest, and it's very difficult for them to take that position and still receive the support from those industries. Now, interestingly enough, with the development of new technologies like the internet, new opportunities for funding have arisen. In other words, for the first time ever, funding on a level that was previously only possible through venture capital or the government has been raised. An example of that was President Obama's campaign, where he raised a substantial amount of funding through crowdfunding. And if a large enough portion of the 99% were ever to become organized and see the value of geothermal power, they could easily fund the project of a geothermal power plant, and if their mission was to create a vast number of quality jobs, that could also be achieved. Now, if any of this is of interest to you, there is a company out there with a democratically run mission to create vast numbers of quality jobs through the development of geothermal power. It's called Adminicus, Adminicus. It can be found at adminicus.com.